Human beings have always been remarkably good at creating categories. We sort people, things into groups. We decide who is respectable and who is suspect, who is trustworthy and who is not, who belongs and who does not. Every society does it. Every institution does it. Even the church, despite its best intentions, have often done it. We draw lines around who is worthy of leadership, who is worthy of belonging, who is worthy of being heard. We convince ourselves that some people are simply more acceptable than others. The stories we hear today challenge those assumptions at every turn. Matthew places before us a tax collector, a woman who had been suffering for 12 years, and a child whom everyone believes is beyond hope. At first glance, they appear to be three separate stories, yet they are woven together by a common thread. In each encounter, Jesus moves towards people whom others have moved away from. In each encounter, Jesus refuses the categories that society and religion have imposed. In each encounter, healing and belonging become inseparable. The story begins with Matthew sitting at a tax booth. For modern readers, it is easy to miss just how shocking this moment would have been. Tax collectors were not simply government employees. They were widely viewed as collaborators with the Roman occupation. They often became wealthy through systems that exploited their neighbors. They were distrusted, disliked, and frequently regarded as traitors to their own people. If anyone represented the kind of person many religious leaders would have considered unworthy of discipleship, it was Matthew. Yet Jesus approaches him and simply says, "Follow me." No interrogation, no probationary period, no demand that Matthew prove himself first, no requirement that he become someone different before receiving the invitation. Jesus simply calls him, and Matthew gets up and follows. What strikes me about the story is that Jesus refuses to let Matthew's past become the final word about his future. Everyone around him already thinks they know who Matthew is. His reputation has been established. His story has already been written in their minds. Yet Jesus sees something more. Where others see failure, Jesus sees possibility. Where others see compromise, Jesus sees potential. Where others see someone who should be excluded, Jesus sees a disciple. Reading this passage, I was struck by the words of the indigenous Christian scholar, Danny Zacharias. Reflecting on this text, he writes that indigenous spirituality often prioritizes relational healing over ritual correctness. He observes that while there are traditions and protocols, relationship is not sacrificed for the sake of rigid boundaries. He writes, "A person is not cast out for past failures, but invited to walk a new path." That insight captures something essential about Jesus' ministry. Again and again, Jesus chooses relationship over exclusion. He prioritized connection over condemnation. He sees people before he sees categories. That becomes even more apparent in what happens next. Matthew hosts a meal, and Jesus sits down at the table with tax collectors and sinners. The religious leaders are scandalized. They're asked the disciples, "Why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners?" Notice what they are really asking. They're not asking about food. They are not asking about hospitality. They are asking about belonging. Who deserves a seat at the table? Who should be welcomed into community? Who should be accepted? The question has echoed throughout history. It takes a different form in every generation. But it is fundamentally the same question. Who belongs? Jesus responds by saying, "Those who are well have no need of a physician, but those who are sick. Go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Mercy, not sacrifice. Compassion, not exclusion. Relationship, not gatekeeping. The religious leaders are focused on maintaining boundaries. Jesus is focused on restoring people. And if we are honest, the church still wrestles with these same questions today. For centuries, Christians have debated who is worthy of leadership, who is worthy of ministry, who is worthy of full participation in the life of the church. Women have been told they cannot answer God's call. LGBTQ people have been told they cannot answer God's call. Entire groups of people have been pushed to the margins because others believed they knew who was qualified and who was not. The categories have changed, but the temptation remains the same. We still spend energy deciding who belongs. Jesus spends energy calling people. We still debate who should be welcome. Jesus keeps expanding the circle. The healing stories that follow continue the same theme. A woman who has suffered from hemorrhages for 12 years finally approaches Jesus. For 12 years, she has carried not only physical pain, but social isolation. For 12 years, she has lived with a stigma attached to her condition. For 12 years, she has likely known what it feels like to be defined by something she never chose. She reaches out, hoping only to touch the edge of Jesus' cloak. And Jesus turns to her, not away from her, towards her. He calls her daughter. The word may be one of the most important moments in this entire story. Daughter, beloved, family, belonging. Jesus does not simply heal her body. He restores her dignity. He restores her identity. He restores her place within the community. The healing is physical, but it is also relational. It is healing of a life that has been pushed to the margins. I'm going to pause for a moment there because often we get the question of why do we need to celebrate Pride Month? Yesterday, I went and shared a few words at the Niles Pride celebration. It was their 4th annual, held at a park, nothing grand, simply at a park with tons of trees and shade, thankfully. Now, the scale to theirs compared to the Des Plaines celebration, quite different. A lot more in the Des Plaines celebration. But what got to me was going and looking at the pictures that they posted later and the immediate hate that people had. See, so many say they're God-fearing. So many people say, I'm a Christian. So many people say, I'm pro-life. And some of these same people are the same ones that are quick to go online and be keyboard warriors and condemn people. See, what I saw yesterday were kids having fun, blowing bubbles, throwing balls around, running around, eyeing the candy apples that were on the table and the cupcakes. I saw happy kids. They weren't there to be told, okay, you're gay now, you're a little lesbian. Laura, you're a lesbian from now on, okay? Oh, 2 Lauras. Okay, both of you can be a lesbian. It's not about that. It's about Laura, Maggie, Kyle, everybody. You should accept everybody, even if they're not like you. Let them be. That's what I saw. The parents instilling a love message, a message of acceptance. You know, their mayor is, some of the language he used, you could see the faces in someone where it's like, And what I gathered is, man's old school. He used some of the language that's a little rough to the younger generations, but the message was very clear. If it's not part of your life, if it's not going to interfere your life, then be quiet and step aside and let people do their life. See, and then another speaker mentioned about how they were afraid, that part of the attendance was hindered because of the current ICE policies. And that people who are different color obviously are more at risk to be picked up for no reason. And I turned out to the lay leader who she's the moderator for St. Peter's Skokie, UCC, and she's the one who invited me to speak. I turned to her and I said, well, I guess the mayor would be picked up because he looked like he was a little darker than I was, and he's not Latino. If we're basing it on skin color. And all these people that they had, mainly politicians, speak, they shared a story. One of them, the state rep, shared how part of celebrating Pride has allowed him to stay alive. See, Pride is not just about being prideful, as the Bible tells us not to be in that sense. Pride Month is about putting the visibility on a population that often gets pushed down and dragged all around. And if you have to ask the question, why do we still have Pride Month, then you're part of the problem. Because until we can stop asking that question, then we have integrated society better. Like, no one really asks, why do we have to have Veterans Day? It just is. We know why. See, and for all those who argue, well, here we go again, giving the Rainbow Mafia a whole month to them, and we don't celebrate our veterans. Well, then you're foolish, because April is, I believe, if I get it correctly, is Military Child Appreciation Month or Recognition Month. May is Military Month. November is Veterans and Military Families Month. And then we have all the different holidays, including our services' birthdays, that are observed throughout the year. So if that's really your problem, you're being ignorant if you don't recognize all those months and all those days that we have. Then there's another one that I saw online that said, well, when is God's month? And some of you might get offended or not like what I'm about to say, but I'm going to say it either way, because in the last 5 years I've been here, I don't have much of a filter even when I come up here. But if you're that stupid to ask when is God's month or day, you're not doing it right. Because every day is God's day. Especially Sunday when we're here, it's God's day. When we have our church holidays that we observe, it's God's day. Every single day of your life should be God's day. That means 365. So that question is ridiculous of when it's God's day, when it's God's month. If you have to ask that, you're not doing it right. See, and part of the problem now is that there's so many youth that are coming out, that are trying to live their authentic selves and are high risk of unaliving themselves because of that rhetoric. LGBTQ youth are way higher percentage of risk than their counterparts who are heterosexual. And if you're pro-life, I would think that you do not want a child, straight or not, to die. That is pro-life. I was raised in a household where we were pro-life. That meant that my dad was outside with other Christians protesting women's rights, and for whatever reason, going into a clinic. My mom never went with us. And I've said this before. Now, I don't know exactly where my mom stood because she never flat out told me, but she told me, as a woman, it is not my place to tell another woman what to do with her body. And if she has an abortion, that is between her and God. Now, take what you want out of that, but that's what was her statement. And what gets to me is that we have so many people saying they're pro-life, yet they're quick to want to unalive someone. They're quick to tell a woman, you have to have that child no matter what. But the moment that child comes into being, oh, well, she needs to work harder and support that child on her own. But you were such pro-life a moment ago. Then your job is to also support that child. We have all this unaliving of people and populations across the world. We have people who automatically are hating on our Jewish siblings because they automatically associate them with the Israeli government and the Zionism movement. And just like Christians, not all Jewish people agree with what the Israeli government is doing. So we should not hate everybody just on a blanket. Just like saying that all Palestinians are part of Hamas. They are not. It's just saying that we all agree with the current administration in the White House. We do not. See, those hateful comments online, if other people see them, youth, young adults, and they're struggling in being, that can help them push them over the edge. And we often forget that almost every population, every ethnic group, every whatever has been oppressed and ostracized in history. Yet we forget those moments and we're quick to judge. So until we actually integrate everybody equally into society, then maybe we won't need to worry about Pride Month. And it tickles me how people get so worked up because McDonald's put out a pride flag. I'm never eating McDonald's again. Yet 11 months out of the year, McDonald's could be given to the political party that you don't support. But you have no problem with that. There's hypocrisy across. We should be looking at our fellow human because that person sitting next to you, that person that's coming across your path, is a living human being made in the image of God. And what I shared yesterday with the folks that attended Niles Pride, I asked, if you are a person who truly believes God makes no mistakes, then that gay person, that lesbian, the transsexual, is not a mistake made in God's image. Plain and simple. You cannot have it both ways. If you truly believe God makes no mistakes, then everyone else on this earth is affirmed, has a right to be loved, and has a right to compassion. And now let's return to our regular scheduled program. Then Matthew tells us about the young girl. But But by the time Jesus arrives, the mourners are already gathered. The community has concluded that her story is over. They laugh when Jesus says otherwise. They are convinced that death has already written the final chapter. Jesus takes her by the hand and restores her to life. Once again, Jesus moves towards someone others have given up on. Once again, Jesus refuses to accept the verdict of exclusion. Once again, Jesus creates possibility where others see only endings. Matthew, the woman, the little girl, a man whom society distrusts, a woman whom society avoids, a child whom society believes is beyond hope, and Jesus moves towards every one of them. That movement may be one of the clearest pictures of the gospel itself. God is always moving towards people, toward the wounded, toward the forgotten, toward the excluded, toward the unlikely, toward those whom others have already dismissed. The good news of this story is not simply that Matthew was called. The good news is that God's call has never belonged to the gatekeepers. It belongs to God. And God keeps calling people anyway. God keeps healing people anyway. God keeps welcoming people anyway. The challenge for the church is whether we will join that movement. Will we continue drawing boundaries around belonging, or will we make a room at the table? Today we receive communion, and at that table there's no RSVP. At that table, everyone is welcome. And I know it's taking some growing pains for our congregation, because when this terrible pastor came along, he gave communion to everybody. And some is like, no, we don't do that until you're confirmed. Well, how do you know an adult who comes in here is confirmed? You don't check, do you? Wait, are you confirmed? No. We assume as an adult they're probably confirmed, so you give them communion. See, in my way, I give it to whoever comes. And if a mother brings a child who wants communion, my hope is that the mother or father or grandparent will teach the little one somewhat of the message, the symbolism of what communion is. And as they grow, they come to appreciate more what communion is. The challenge for the church is whether we will join that movement. Will we continue drawing boundaries? Will we spend our energy deciding who is worthy, or who will we trust that God's grace is larger than our categories? The gospel leaves little doubt about whether Jesus stands. He stands beside Matthew. He stands beside the woman. He stands beside the little girl. And he continues standing beside all those whom the world is tempted to overlook. Think about that. Jesus continues standing beside all those whom the world is tempted to overlook. Just like the nearly 200 religious organizations that were removed from being able to officially pastor to our military personnel this past week. Think about that. Thanks be to God. Amen.